without further ado, the man of the hour, John. We're all looking forward to seeing this talk. I will cut myself off. I'm going to press mute all.
Yeah. Everybody seen that? Give me visual thumbs up. We're all good? Cool, great. All right, so this talk is called Vue for React People, React for Vue People. I did not know it would be so relevant. There's like so many folks that are React folks. So awesome. This will be good for a lot of people. All right, so just a little bit of background about myself. Currently I'm working at Bambee. I just started about 2 weeks ago. Principal UI front-end engineer there. Formerly, I was working for the Elizabeth Warren campaign for about 8 months, up until the campaign ended, like before before COVID, which feels like 5 years ago, but it really was like a month and a half ago.
Is that really you on her screen, or does everybody just get a screenshot? They get to like paste.
Oh no, that's actually me. Yeah, that's actually me. That is a photo of me and the boss. That is the day. So the day that Elizabeth Warren announced that she was dropping out, she went to the Boston office. I was working from home here in LA. So she went to the Boston office and gave everybody a hug. This is my hug. She hugged the laptop. Had a short little convo, but this is me and the boss. All right, what else we got here? So yeah, that's where I was. Before that, I was at Joy Mode with Matt Montañez for about 1.5 years or so. I got him and everybody else involved with Vue there, sold them on that. Prior to that, I worked for an agency for about 6.5 years, Blue State Digital, doing tons of stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. And then before that, I was actually a designer, worked for JDate a long time ago. So yeah, I don't normally list the years here, but I just wanted to like give some context for like how long I've been doing this thing. Because there's a lot of stuff that I used to use all the time that I don't touch at all anymore. In my designer years, we're talking like 2004, if you wanted to build rich experiences on the internet, you're going to be doing it in Flash. So I actually got my first job out of college based off of the strength of like a Flash animation I did. I also occasionally when I needed to would fire up Director. I was still a designer, so I wasn't really doing deep coding work. Dreamweaver was pretty much all I needed then. Otherwise, my world was like Photoshop, Illustrator, and once Firebug came along for Firefox, then I was actually able to be a little bit more effective for fixing kind of HTML, CSS bugs. But that was kind of the extent of what I was doing was mostly design and writing HTML that I would then hand off to for people to implement. But the nice thing about Firebug was once I was empowered to start fixing bugs, and then once jQuery came along, I suddenly was like, hey, I can actually do this. This is pretty cool. It started me along the front-end development path, and it was kind of how I switched careers. Enter the front-end time. So from 2009 to 2016-ish, this is more like what my world looked like. I mentioned I was working for an agency. I was doing a ton of stuff in jQuery, jQuery UI, jQuery mobile, using all kinds of different CMSs, Expression Engine, WordPress, Drupal, using Bootstrap Foundation, just all kinds of stuff. Most of the web apps I was building at the time was using jQuery and Backbone. I would also occasionally be working in AngularJS, so the pre-1.x version, and using Google Closure Compiler. So there's a lot of stuff that I was working on in all the different things, and it felt like my tech stack was changing every couple of years. Just a lot of relearning, which stressful at the time, fun, but I'm kind of glad that things have stabilized a little bit, and now all I seem to be using is React or Vue, depending on who I'm working with. Webpack for my bundling, so no more I was using Grunt and then Gulp, and Bower, but these days it's really just Webpack and NPM. Netlify, if I can manage it. Netlify is awesome, guys. Check it out. I know a bunch of folks are familiar with that, but definitely check it out. My CMS these days is Contentful, so a headless CMS, no templating layer there, really awesome. And then I've also been into Tailwind the last few months as far as like a CSS style framework goes. So this is nice. Things have stabilized. This has been kind of like what I've been doing for the last few years. So even though I've managed to whittle down my toolkit, I'm still using both Vue and React. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's lots of React work out there. It's kind of hard to ignore it. It's like the big elephant in the room. It's what most employers are looking for. I mean, it's fine. React is a fine library. It's, you know, it's a great library even. I like it a lot. It was definitely like a eye-opening coming from, you know, like jQuery and Angular, AngularJS, and then moving into React. Like there's a little bit of a learning curve, but once things clicked, like there's basically no going back. What I found once I started using Vue, though, it's like it takes a lot of the similar concepts between React, or takes a lot of similar concepts from React, and also some of the nice stuff that was in Angular, and kind of like makes a really great developer experience combining the two. Similarities, they both use a virtual DOM. They both have a component-based architecture, and they both focus on the kind of their core library with the external, with other things such as routing and global state management handled by companion libraries. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but yeah, for the most part, like there's a lot of similar concepts, which is what I'm going to go into today. First thing I talk about is the virtual DOM. So what does that mean exactly? The virtual DOM is a representation of kind of an ideal HTML structure. It's the DOM that we want to display. During a process that's called reconciliation, both React and Vue take your virtual DOM and they figure out how to make the actual DOM match that. So it goes through, and both React and Vue will do the actual DOM manipulation that will update the page that you're seeing. It's a declarative approach to DOM manipulation. So you're just describing what you want the DOM to be as a function of state. And then React and Vue figures out how to do that for you. You don't yourself figure it out. And this is like when I talked about the learning curve for moving from like jQuery to React, this is that. Like I didn't kind of figure out like, you know, like at first I was like, how do I just want to add a class to this element. That's not really like the approach. The approach is more just like, what would cause me to add a class to an element, and like, how would I describe that as in a render function? I don't actually have to myself add or remove classes. So that was huge. So it's, you know, it's what sets the modern JavaScript frameworks apart from jQuery, where you're directly manipulating the DOM. And like this, you know, not only does that make your life easier, but it really eliminates a lot of the performance barriers that people were coming up with, like that were hitting in jQuery. Like I spent a lot of my 2010s optimizing really bad jQuery that people were writing. It's like, it's easy to do. You know, it's easy to write bad jQuery, but now you don't have to think about that. Like we just remove that, we abstract that out completely. So, trust in the virtual DOM magic, and you trust in reconciliation, good to go. So what does that virtual DOM actually look like? So let's look at the HTML that we have on the left here. It's pretty straightforward. It's a div with a list of names. On the right, we have what the virtual DOM representation of that would be. So we've got, we've got essentially like a nested tree of objects where we've got a node name, some attributes, and then children, which is an array of either more nodes or text nodes. So these nodes are called vnodes for virtual nodes. And then this is just a text node.
Is this in a particular language, or is this just like you're kind of just mentally describing it for us?
This might actually be this. Yeah, I mean, like this is essentially what it is. Yeah, it's JSON. Yeah, but this is when we talk about what like the virtual DOM. This is essentially it. I don't know if the keys are named something different, but this is more or less it. Yeah, virtual DOM. It's a tree of vnodes and text nodes.
So this is like a mental model we can use.
It's a mental model, and it's like pretty close to what actually like what these things are doing. When we talk about virtual DOM, it's like this is what this is what the virtual DOM looks like as far as like how it's kept in memory.
It's kind of like what the browser is seeing internally.
Not what the browser is seeing, what JavaScript, what React is seeing when it says like, what is the virtual DOM and how do I diff this against the actual DOM? Like this is a representation of the virtual DOM, and it will figure out based off of this what it needs to do to change things. So all right, how do we get a V node? In both React and Vue, there's actually a create element function, which is often abbreviated to H for hypertext. The H function takes as its first argument either a tag name, which is a string, or an existing V node. The second argument is an object that has a bunch of options, usually like class names and props and stuff that will be merged into your node. And then the third argument is going to be children of it. For React, it's third and subsequent arguments, so it's just going to be a series of additional arguments. In Vue, the third argument is going to be an array. Also in React, that second options argument is going to be required. So if you're not using it, you just need to pass it null. You can, since we know the type in Vue of if it's an array or an object, it's able to kind of infer there. So if you were to write out your create element functions in React or Vue, they look like this. So still fairly similar. Yeah, still fairly similar at the base of it. But you're probably thinking that like none of your code actually looks like this, whether you've been writing Vue or whether you've been writing React. You're usually not actually writing create element render functions. Instead, both React and Vue abstract out those render functions to something that's more pleasant to work in. In React, that's JSX, and in Vue, that's templates. So here we've got an example of what both Vue and React would look like respectively. We've got React on the left, Vue on the right. It's pretty boring. There's not really much of a difference here. Like it just looks like more or less HTML, other than like this class name thing right here. Otherwise, you know, here's your app. But let's break this up into components and make things a little bit more interesting. All right, so to start, I want to break the list item itself. That would be this guy, li. I'm gonna break that up into its own component, and to start talking about props, prop types, and memoization. So here we're going to assume that I'm going to make a name list item component. It's going to receive a first and a last prop for our names, and then it's going to let's see. It's going to receive a first and last name prop. I'm going to say that the first name is required, the last name is optional, and then we'll just concatenate the first name and the last name to make a full name. We've got similar concepts here, but you can really start to see the difference between how the two play out. So in Vue, we explicitly define what props a component expects to receive in a props object. So here we've got our props. It's going to take first, it's going to take last, and here we can also define the type of what that's going to be. It can be string. I can say it's required for the last name. Since it's not required, I'm not going to put that there, but I am going to put in a default value. Similarly in React, this is no longer part of the core library PropTypes, but I would either use TypeScript or use PropTypes. I'd highly recommend that you do some kind of type enforcement with your props. So if you're not using PropTypes or TypeScript, I'd say pick it up. But here we're defining our PropTypes. You can see we're passing props in to our nameless item component. First and last, I'm just destructuring here. And then below, I get to define what the prop types are. Prop type string, marking this as required. And then last is not required. So because it's not required, I have to provide a default, and there's a typo there, but I have to provide my default of null. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is memoization. So in Vue, we have a thing called computed properties. That's this right here. Computed properties are functions. They must always return a value, and the result of that value is kept in memory. so that we don't have to recompute the value every time that a component is re-rendered. Every time a component is re-rendered, yeah. Anytime one of the values, though, that as long as anytime one of the reactive values that is a part of a computed property updates, that's when a computed property will actually recompute. So here I can say, like, I want a full name. I'm going to check to see if there is a last name. If there is a last name, then I'm just going to combine this first name, last name. If there's not, I'm just going to return the first name. Pretty simple like that. In React, they have a thing, there's the hook called useMemo. So useMemo takes two arguments. The first is going to be like computed. It's going to be a function that returns a value. And then the second argument is an array of that where you explicitly define the things that will actually like are dependencies of this computed property. So with Vue knows that last name, first name are part of the name computed property. So if any of these change, it'll know to recompute it. With React, you have to explicitly say, I'm going to watch first, I'm going to watch last. If either of those change, then update the value of name. Now, it's a little bit of a philosophical difference here between React and Vue. In Vue, I'd say this is pretty common. It's not weird to see this. I think this is like first name, last name, I think is even in the docs as an example of a computed property to use. In React, this is actually kind of overkill. Like, I don't think most people would end up using a useMemo for something like first name, last name. We'd probably just have some kind of like a ternary expression or something. You would more often use useMemo for some really big computation, like mapping over an array. And that's just it's just a philosophical difference between React or Vue. Like Vue says, let's just keep stuff in memory, and React says, let's just use your processing cycles for small stuff like this. But they're both there as options to use. One thing that I really like about Vue as we start to look at this is the organization of the component. So like we explicitly define where we're going to have different types of reactive data, right? So like props are defined in the props section of a Vue object. Computed properties are going to be in the computed section of the Vue object. And then like the template is its own block and usually sits, you can put it wherever you want, but it usually sits up top. I think that's really nice in that like it makes it pretty apparent right away what you're actually looking at, like what the most important thing is here. Like what is a named list item? Well, it's a list item. Whereas here with a React, the stuff, like what this thing is kind of sitting right here in the middle. It is at least at like the end of the component. Usually that's where you want to throw it. But sometimes there's other things along in the component that take up space. So for me, like cognitively, when I look at a Vue component, it's pretty easy to get oriented. Whereas with a React component, like the fact that useMemo here there could be stuff above or below it. There could be methods or other things. Like where you put things is kind of up to you. So, a little bit more free-flowy. All right, so that's our name list item. Let's move up a component to the list component itself. And this will give us a chance to talk about iteration and conditionals. So we have our containing list element here. It's just a UL. It's going to take, as a prop, it's going to take an array of objects with first name and last name. If there are no names, we're going to show a message that says no names in it instead. So here we can see how iteration and conditionals play out. In React, you're entirely using statements within your JSX, using curly brackets right here. So to folks that aren't used to like JSX or ES6, this might look kind of, this might look kind of weird, but essentially we're just like looking for, like a truthy value here. And if this is truthy, then we can show this. If this is falsy, then we just kind of stop and nothing actually displays. So similar, Yeah. Whereas in Vue, we actually use a directive, vif, and here we can take an expression within vif. This should look a little bit more familiar to Angular people, and probably looks familiar to folks who've done HTML templating in general, which they're like, I think Elixir is mentioned, like, so Django and other kind of like a lot of Django and like Mustache handlebars this feels a little bit more familiar than something like JSX. So that's maybe again, like, it's a philosophical contrast between React and Vue. Folks familiar with HTML templating, this probably looks nice. Folks who are more into pure JavaScript or like functional purity, this probably looks a little cleaner to them because we're not putting expressions within HTML attributes. Similarly, with our iteration, we've got our array of names. I want to output a name list item component for every name. So here we've got a v-for directive. It takes our names, and we can say item for every item in names, and then we can pass down we can just pass down the entire object as props using vbind. With React, we're going to instead it's all expressions. So we're going to take names and we're going to map to create a new array of components, vnodes from that. So here we're taking names, we're going to map over it, and then we're just returning name list item component. Both React and Vue don't strictly require keys, but you really should be using keys if you're not using keys. And then here we're using the spread operator to pass transparently everything that's in item to the child component. So yeah, that's another thing to point out, vbind versus this kind of spread operator here. Cool, I think, yeah. All right, and then let's see, moving up, local state, lifecycle hooks, side effects. So finally, let's look at the main parent component for our little app. In this component, I want to initially display a loading message while I fetch my list of names from an API. Once that list of names is fetched, I want to update the loading state and display the names in the list. So Vue provides lifecycle hooks to perform a lot of these side effects that are happening when a component is created, when it's mounted, when it's updated.
Just to clarify, for anybody who's new to this, do not confuse those with React hooks or the Vue equivalent that's new, the composition hooks. This predates the word hook in general.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, in this world, I
should probably call it even like lifecycle methods. In fact, I think, yeah, if I were to rewrite this, I just call it lifecycle methods. But so these are methods that fire at certain points in a component's lifecycle. Both React and Vue have this, but it's a little different how we use it. First, I'm going to talk about Vue. So let's look at the Vue component. You can see that we have our data method. So this data method returns an object. This object is essentially like our local state for the object. So we have an isLoading local state of true initially, and then we've got a name. We've got our names. So names I'm going to say is null to start off with. Right here we have a created method. So this created method fires when the component is created. It can be asynchronous, so I just throw async in front of that. So this is just, it's a side effect, so it's not really blocking the rest of the component from rendering. We're going to await names from our API, and then once we have our names, we're going to directly mutate our names local state with the result. People who are familiar with React are probably seeing some key differences here. Additionally, another thing that I have, just for an example, this is probably not how I'd write this normally, but as an example, I have a watcher on our names state. If names changes, we have available as a first argument the new value of the names. If you want, you can also have the second argument that would be the old value of names. There's not really an equivalent for this in React, so it's actually a nice thing that Vue has. So here I'm checking to see if we have a new value, even if it's in an empty array, that's still a truthy thing. So if we have a new value, then we know that we've successfully fetched our results from our API. So we're going to set the loading state to false. And then if you look back up the template, we say vif loading, vif is loading, we'll show the little loader. If it's not loading, we've got this nice little directive v-else here. So if it's not loading, then we'll just show, then we can show our name list passing in names from here as a prop. That's what the little colon is a prop for names. All right. So that's what that looks like on the Vue side. From the React side, React also has lifecycle methods and local state. I'd say traditionally, lifecycle methods and local state were only available in class-based components. I haven't shown a single class-based component yet in this demo, and I will not be showing any class-based components because Kobe mentioned hooks. So about 2 years ago, I'd say a year and a half ago, hooks dropped in Vue and essentially changed a lot of how people are writing React. At least that's
React, you mean?
In React, yeah. Oh, did I say Vue? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
It
dropped in React.
It dropped in React and largely changed how people were writing things. I was writing a lot of React, I want to say in like 2017, 2016. And then I got on the Vue bandwagon and was like all about Vue. Meanwhile, hooks happened. And I came back to React when I was working for the Warren campaign. And I was like, what is going on? Like, this looks completely different from everything. I don't understand how to do this. So, it's a little bit of a learning curve, but once I got it, I was all on board. So like, let's look at what's happening here. So with hooks, we're able to have local state and lifecycle methods within functional components. And what does that actually look like? So here we're using two hooks, useEffect and useState. So let's look at useState. It works by passing an initial value, useState true, and it returns a variable for your value, and then a setter method to update that state value. So is loading.
Sorry, I just want to continue to reconfirm. We're not talking about React hooks yet, nor the.
No, this is React hooks right here.
Oh, okay, okay, great.
UseState, useEffect. These are hooks in React. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah. useState is a local state hook that allows you to use local state within a functional component. So yeah, you can see I'm setting an initial value of true to is loading, setting initial value of null to names. I've got our set is loading and set names to update these values. Within React, unlike Vue, you can't just directly mutate state. You need to actually use a set state method, which are what these guys are. And then for our lifecycle methods, I have here a useEffect. So useEffect is effect by effect meaning inside effect. So what I'm doing here, this is similar to my watch method, where I'm going to use an effect. I'm going to check names. If names is truthy, then we're going to set loading to false, which is essentially this. And that's my first argument, is like what the effect, the function, the effect itself. The second argument is an array of things that I, like useMemo, it's an array of things that I'm watching that will actually trigger this useEffect hook to happen. So in this case, I'm watching names. If names changes, then I'm going to run this function. So yeah, that's essentially what watch is over here. The second one is our fetching of the API. So useEffect, the function for useEffect itself this right here cannot be asynchronous. You can still fire off asynchronous events though, or asynchronous functions by doing like a self-executing function right here. But that's set like this, essentially, is this right here. We're going to await our API, and then we're going to set names to result right there. The second argument here is an empty array. So by an empty array, this is going to tell React, I only want to fire this one time. There's not going to be any other thing that should trigger this to fire again. So that is that's what you get here if you have an empty array. If you don't pass a second argument at all, then this use effect hook will fire every time that the component re-renders. So maybe you want that to happen. Usually, though, I wouldn't recommend that. I would usually throw something here. All right, and then finally, we are just returning our component itself. We have our isLoading with this little with our and operator for our loading div, and then we have our. There is not really an equivalent for velse. You just have to do kind of the opposite of what you want. So not isLoading, then we show our names list.
With ternary there, right?
Yeah, I guess you could. Yeah, you could do an isLoading question mark div loading, and then yeah. So yeah, I guess you could do that. That would be your if else. One thing to add that wasn't in my in the code here, but you can also in addition to vif and velse, there's also a vif else, which would similarly take an expression like this. So you could have a div vif is loading, div vif is error, show an error screen, and then velse you would show this. All right. So so I talked a little bit about kind of the learning curve of hooks and like this use effect. It was confusing to look at first, but the more I actually got into it, the more I really got to appreciate it. I appreciate both approaches, but I like the organization of Vue. I like that it's opinionated enough to kind of help guide you in how you structure your components without having too much cognitive overhead of how you should what's the right way to do something. It kind of lays it out for you. On the other hand, on React, hooks, it took me a while to get used to, but once I did, I really started to appreciate some of the code reusability patterns that it opened up. So let's look at that, code reusability. What I want to do is I want to extract the logic of the component state and lifecycle and just take that, like fetching stuff from the API, having a loading state and like a named state. I want to pull that out so that I can reuse it somewhere else. So what I can actually do in React, I can use the use effect and use state hooks to build my own hook. So that's what I'm doing here. You can see I'm just lifting this stuff and I'm dropping in here. I'm making a new hook that I'm calling use names. This hook, you can pass it an initial value. You can pass it, what number of arguments that you can then use within here. So I'm just passing possibly an initial value that you can use for state. But otherwise, like a lot of the logic is all here. And then I'm just returning an object that exposes isLoading and names. So then, since I have my hook, I can then take that hook and import it into my component. And I eliminate all of the code that was in my app. And I've got this right here. I can destructure the result of use names hook. And I have my isLoading and I've got my names. So, now my app component, the actual component itself, you're really, you're concerning yourself with the view layer at this point, whereas a lot of the logic is sitting in the hook. So this is awesome. I think really, really awesome. And pretty much sold me on the value of hooks. Unfortunately, hooks are not a thing yet in Vue, not part of existing functionality within the current version. However, it is, Vue has been taking note and paying attention, and there are changes coming in Vue 3 that they'll be where they'll be releasing their own take on hooks. That's the composition API. So disclaimer that I haven't actually worked that much with the composition API because it's Vue 3, it's a future version. I don't know how much stuff is still in flux, but it's essentially, it's similar to React. The idea is that we should be able to extract out a lot of this logic and return an object where we can have a lot of our shared, share a lot of logic between components without sharing the component itself. So again, I haven't tried this myself. This is me just kind of like writing a demo, which I didn't test, but you should be able to, take certain pieces of Vue's reactivity. So we've got an on before mount, a ref, and a watch. You can assign this stuff out. We've got our is loading names. And you should be able to take some of this logic and then return similarly is loading and names. And then we can then import the hook, our own hook, into a new method in Vue 3 that's called setup, where we can then return some of these things that will live within the Vue object. So here, we're getting is loading in names from use names, and then we're exposing that to the rest of the Vue component when we return that here. So yeah, again, disclaimer, haven't really dove too much into the composition API because I just haven't had the opportunity to really. And it's Vue 3, so if you want to play around with the beta, you can do that. There's also like a library out there to help you shim some of this this functionality into Vue 2. But this is, when you hear about the composition API and people being excited about it, that I think that's where a lot of this is gonna come in, where it's gonna be really useful. And I don't know if it's gonna be entirely as transformative to Vue as it was to React. Of modern React components now don't look like they used to 2 years ago, but I think there'll be a lot of really cool reusability patterns within Vue. So yeah, you can either wait until Vue 3, you can shim it now, or otherwise, if you want tried and true reusability patterns within Vue, scope slots, higher order components are the way to go. But that's a different talk entirely, maybe for some future date. Cool. All right.
Just to be clear, Vue 3 is imminent. I think they're on beta 12 as of yesterday, and that the release is supposed to be Q2 2020, which is essentially now. So it's essentially all but Vue 3. And but one other thing I wanted to touch on, you're talking about the setup, is one of the big issues when they first announced this was the concern that it was not going to be backwards compatible, and that it was going to make it so that you kind of did have to rewrite everything, but you don't have to do any of this hook stuff in Vue 3. So all of your knowledge from Vue 2 can stay exactly the same. It's just an added bonus that you can add to it if you want to reorganize your code, but it's not, again, it's a very smooth transition, but it's all but dropped, if you will. So it's going to be out in the next month or two, probably, officially.
Yeah, good thing to point out. You can continue to write your components the way you write them. And then if you want to adopt the composition API and that setup method, it's totally up to you. You don't have to. But in the same way that that Vue has learned from React, I think Vue has also learned from Angular that you don't really want to be dropping hugely breaking changes on people. That is things to look forward to, hopefully very soon. All right, one more thing I want to touch on when it comes to the logic of a component, events and methods. So React and Vue are similar here, but different. So in React, so both of these are both React examples. In React, the usual paradigm is that when you're using events between components, the parent component is usually going to be passing down as a prop a handler function for events. For the sake of the demo, I'm having the state of the form here. I'm having the state of the form live in the app, on our main app component. So I've got this new state here. I'm going to call it new name, and the setter set new name. And I'm going to be passing down a handler for handling change and handling submit. So on a change event, I'm going to, like, I expect that I'll be getting a new value, and I can just set the new name as that value. And then on a submit, you know, I put this together pretty quickly, so it's maybe not the best, not the way I'd actually architect this stuff, but like, let's say on a submit, I'm just going to get a normal submit event. I'm going to prevent default on that event, and then I'm going to update our names with a new array appending the new name on our existing names. So those are our handlers. Here, for folks that are Vue people, you've got this little like empty brackets. This is called a React fragment. So generally, you want to have like one child element when you're returning an expression, something like this. But you can actually pass multiple elements as long as you wrap it in a React fragment. So that's what this is. We have two sibling components, a name list and a name form, but they're both sitting under the same kind of conditional here.
And in Vue, they don't call it a fragment, but just we always have to have essentially one parent div. So if you had two divs, you just that were the same level, you would wrap them in another div. So
I'll show the example for that in a second. But yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. So events and yeah. So looking at the form though, here we've got our name form. It's just going to be a form. It's got a submit handler on submit. When submit happens, we're just going to fire whatever function was the submit prop handler, and then we've got our input. That's going to be taking the value as a prop, and then we've got our on change. I'm going to have a little change handler in here because I want to take the event itself, and I want to execute the change handler using the value of the event as opposed to like the event object itself. So that's what we got going on here. And then, yeah, we've got our prop types. I'm just defining my default props of some no-op functions here and an empty value. All right, so that's that's kind of how this would look like in React. In Vue, this differs. The paradigm in Vue is not so much passing down handlers as props from the parent to the child. Instead, what happens more often is that you're going to be emitting up an event from the child to the parent, and then it's up to the parent to listen to that event and handle that themselves. So what we've got here, there's let's see, a few different things to talk about. First, let me talk about what Toby was talking about child element. If I want to kind of wrap multiple things within kind of like a VL's conditional, or any other time when there should be some kind of like wrapper around multiple sibling components, you can use a template to be just kind of like an empty, it's essentially a div, but it doesn't actually render any DOM. So I don't have a closing template here, so that's an error. But like, rather than a React fragment, I can use another template tag to wrap around here. All right, we have our handle submit handler.
But just to point out, John, just the premise of the fact that either way you kind of have like a parent div here for the inside the kind of
Right.
the outside template, and the same concept in React. Yeah, you always need to have like one top level one. I think that's just because of the way the virtual DOM works. It basically is expecting just one div per essentially like component. So so of course, if you want multiple divs, then you just can wrap those all in a parent div.
Yeah, and I think that's like when we talk about like React fragments and this like template, it's kind of a way to signal like this isn't just a single child, it's multiple children. So it handles it a little bit differently. Rather than outputting a vnode, it outputs an array of vnodes.
I thought that was going with Vue 3 though, right?
Maybe. I possibly, yeah, I don't know. I haven't read up on that. Been in the React world for the last year, so anyways.
You mean the need for it is going to be gone in Vue 3?
Yeah, so the now you could have you could have two parent div in the template.
Huh, okay.
Right.
Nice to know.
Cool. All right. Yeah, and like honestly, you could, if you wanted to in Vue, you could have sibling elements, but you would have to use a render function. You'd have to get a little bit more nitty gritty and actually like write some, get into the render function, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. But all right, so let's look at. So we've got our handle submit. We have a new object within our Vue component called methods. So methods expose methods that can then be used throughout your component. So we've got our handle submit defined here. This is setting our names to be new value for this.names and new name. Another thing to point out is that this is in Vue. You can also just if you want, you can do the thing within your template if you want, rather than use a method. So in this case, I want to assign the new name to our the result of the event. That's this $event is placeholder for, that's a variable for the event that's being passed up from the component. Another thing to point out, I've got this like funny like name dash changed. Let's look at where that's coming from. So if we look at our name form, similarly to similar to the React component I had, we've got our form, an input, and a button. On form, we're listening for a submit event. This is just a normal submit DOM event. When that happens, I'm going to emit upwards the submit a submit event. I'm defining what the event is right here, submit in the first argument. And the second argument is what I'm going to be passing up along with that any listeners will be having. So in this case, I'm just passing the event itself. So in this case, the event would be like the submit event being passed up, and that's, would handle that here. One nice thing that Vue has is this, on listeners, you can actually prevent default without having to type e.prevent default. You can just add a .prevent modifier on it, and that's essentially you preventing default. On our input, so React uses on change. Vue, you can also do a change event, but more often than not, you'll be using an input event. So that's what this is. We're going to be doing our handle input. So what is handle input? Go down to our methods. We're going to be emitting $emit a name changed event. So it's really easy to create a custom event. You can kind of name your events whatever you want. In this case, name changed. And then I'm going to be passing up my, like our React component, just the value of the input that's changing. I haven't found an easy way to like do custom events the same way in React, but also like the paradigm is different. It's not really how you would do, since your Vue is more events up, you can have all different types of names for events, whereas React, it's handlers down. All right, so that's the main, I think probably one of the big contrasts between how React and Vue actually like architect parent-child communication. All right, so that covers a lot of logic around components, but I haven't even addressed one of like the most important parts of building out components, and that's styling. This is where Vue and React are radically different. So React, when you look at how to actually style a component, they don't really give you a good answer. There's a few different options. One, you could just import your style sheet. So here I've got style myapp.css. I've written out styles specifically for my app, for this component. MyApp CSS would probably have a .myapp class in it that defines things. So it's nice in that React will only load up the styles as you like load up the components as you need. But once those styles are imported, it becomes part of kind of your global CSS namespace. So you're going to have to worry about namespace collisions. There's a chance that like you might have, just like normal CSS, if you already have a MyApp class defined that's doing some styling, then you're gonna have to deal with the cascade of a new CSS class coming in. Another option, if you don't want to use external style sheets, you can use inline styles. So, you can write out your styles as an object, background color, margin, padding, and then you can pass these styles inline. Vue, you can do this too if you want. Some benefits here, like it at least opens up the possibility of using logic in your styles. But downside is it's weird. Like you got to write stuff camel case like this, or you have to wrap it in quotes for keys. I mean, you're writing JavaScript. You're not writing CSS. So for folks that are actually used to writing CSS, this doesn't really feel natural. And then it's fine for some uses, but it's kind of messy to scale it. If you want to, you could export these container styles and kind of pass them around. That's at least nice. Again, like a nice thing is like you can use logic here, so you could have an object that has an enum of like all your colors. But again, like CSS is a thing that exists and is a pretty good tool. So if you can use CSS, that's nice. Another third option that's pretty popular is CSS and JS. So now we're starting to write components that are purely like style wrapping components using libraries like styled components. Looks a little bit like this. So the nice thing here, so I guess essentially what we're doing, we're using styled components to create a styled div. This is going to have our styling in it. The nice thing is you can actually like pass in props to styled components and do logic based off of those props. So, that's nice. I could have a theme here of dark, a dark mode theme. If it's dark, then we'll use these things. If it's not, we'll use these things. So like that's kind of nice. Allow logic via props. Another really nice benefit of this is you don't have to worry about like class names anymore and like name spacing your CSS. Like this is, like styled components will create a class name that is unique for this particular div. And you could, if you want to reuse this styling, then you can just like export this component out and reuse it across different components. So, and here I'm using, my style div. So, that's an option. Styled components are pretty popular. Folks who are using React, many of you are probably using styled components. I personally hate styled components. Like I really don't like them. It's just a lot of typing. It's a lot of boilerplate. It's not really a natural CSS writing experience. Like this sucks. I do not like this. I'd rather use inline styles for something like this than, like props. And it's not like, in terms of like style reusability, people don't actually, my experience is people do a bad job of reusing these styled components across different components. So, I'm not a fan, but I know a lot of people do use it. There's, I guess, there's other options as well within the CSS and JS world. There's a ton. There's emotion is another popular one. If I have to use CSS and JS in React, styled JSX is another one, which feels a lot more natural. Like that's probably the one I'd recommend. But yeah, it's not really, there's not really a first-class solution to styling components in React. Like they kind of leave it up to you, and I'm not a fan. Meanwhile, in Vue though, a huge fan of how Vue has handled styling. So in Vue, we've shown our template block, we've shown our script block. Additionally, you can have style blocks within your Vue single file component. So now, the nice thing is we actually have all the stuff that relates to a component within a single .vue single file component. It's really nice. You can have a style block that is scoped. So without having to write like styled components, I can write styling that is just for this component. Vue will namespace the component using data attributes so that the styles that you write here only apply to this component. And like if there is another my app class somewhere else in another component, it's It's not going to be affected by this. This is really like this class is really just a way to refer to this my app component. It's like it's great. Additionally, if you drop scoped, you can just have a style block. Then you can actually write global styles if you wanted to. I tend to avoid writing global styles as a rule, but sometimes you want that. So like maybe I want to write a CSS variable for white here. Maybe I want to set my font family to the best fonts in the world. These are now global styles, or at least they're global styles that will load as soon as my app loads. So like, these don't exist within the global style space until the component is loaded. So, this will, just something to keep in mind. All right.
If I could just jump in on this one for a sec, if you go back, just for clarity, he's kind of trying to show you two things right here. The one that says the one in the middle that says style, and the other one that says style scopes tends to be in two different components. So at least the way I do it, and correct me if you do it differently, John, is that I kind of, when you have like your top level component that's like your entire app, if you will, that's where I do that's like the only place that I have something that doesn't say the word scoped. So that's kind of like where I might have styles that are for the entire app. Let's say the font family or something like that. That's something that you're going to do once. And then each individual component, meaning you'll only really see kind of like those the two blocks, the template block and the style, and that style block without the word scoped, in one place in the entire app, which is like my app.vue, kind of where we're showing it, right?
Yep.
Whereas the style scoped, you'll use instead of the style in every other component in the entire thing, which is like, hey, for this particular component I'm building, let's say it's a button, that's where I want to style out like what this button is going to look like, and you want it to be scoped only to that button, that you want the button to be red, and that shouldn't affect anything else in the rest of your app. So basically, style scoped is kind of what you use through 99% of your app, and then the middle one is kind of you use one place. You'll never see them. I mean, almost never see them kind of both of them in the same component like he's showing you right now. He was just trying to show you two different things.
Yeah.
On this one, sorry.
Yeah.
So this is one thing I wanted to ask was, let's say like you had like a global class, like something generic like .header or something, but then you had a scoped class that was also .header within a local component. If you were to reference that class in this template, would it inherit both the global and the local scope?
Yeah, good question. All right, so yeah, the way this works, I don't really have a code example to bring up. So the way scoped styles work in Vue is it will actually like add a data attribute to your component. So like it'll be like data-v- some random string, and that is what's gonna it's gonna use an attribute selector. So my app square brackets data v random string. So it's still gonna have my app as a class. So it's gonna cascade with your scope style taking precedence because it has more specificity in that it's a class plus a data attribute selector versus just a class.
So in terms of like naming convention, then like you wouldn't want your scope classes to have like super generic class names then, right? That could like potentially conflict with.
Yeah, so there's, well, the thing is, generally speaking, avoid writing global styles unless you're using something like Tailwind or utility classes, in which case go all out on global styles. But like if you're not, generally speaking though, you don't want to be writing a lot of global styles.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, they will not conflict. That's where
they won't conflict, but they'll cascade.
Yeah.
So like dot header will apply, and then dot header scoped will cascade over any of those existing rules. So like, if it was a different background color, that would update, but like margin padding would stay the same. We're talking, this is just traditional CSS at this point. Like that's the main thing.
Got it. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Yeah.
I guess what I was trying to say is if you had two classes and two different components that happen to have the same name, those are not going to conflict with each other because they're going to have that data attribute like tagged onto it. It's going to be seen in the DOM as two separate CSS classes.
not two separate CSS. CSS classes are going to be the same. It's that data attribute selector. They will have different data attribute selectors. So that's what is going to be the key. I'll throw this out there in terms of naming conventions, though. I'm a big fan of like your root element for a component should be the kebab case version of whatever that element is. So my app for my app. That's just a personal like, best practice. Because then in like if you want to like if a parent wants to style the child component, you know that this would be name-list, right? If I was following that convention, and I can style name-list right here, which I would normally do for like layout stuff.
And why kebab case over camel case? Just curious.
Because kebab case is more normal for CSS.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Cool. All right. All right. So logic and styles. So it's easy to add and remove CSS. Easy enough to add and remove CSS classes conditionally in Vue. We've got this is a nice thing within Vue. You can do a bind of class, colon class, and then you can have dynamic classes here. So this is an object. So we can say the key is the class that I want to add, and then the value is a condition. So if dark mode is truthy, then we'll add dark mode class. If it's falsy, then we'll remove dark mode class. Really great. Similarly, this like a dynamic classes in Vue. This is an object. It could be a string. It could be an array, and it can also be a combination. It can be an array with objects and strings in it if you want. Really nice. It's a thing React doesn't have. You have to use an external class names library for that. Big fan of it. But if I wanted to like conditionally do dark mode, then I could add or remove a dark mode class. It's kind of like writing traditional CSS. Additionally, Vue is really nice about pulling in preprocessors if you want. So I can just add a lang equals SCSS, lang equals Sass, lang equals stylus, or less, whatever you want. And then you can start programming in that language. So, rather than using CSS variables, I could just use a Sass variable here, white, black, and then, like just styling conditionally. You can, I mentioned you can also do inline styles if you want, same thing. A lot of your logic and styles, totally doable. Maybe not as flexible as like CSS and JS, but as previously stated, I don't really like CSS and JS. So here you go. All right, so yeah.
John, quick question, if you can take one. On your previous slide, it's kind of like intuitive, but it's kind of like latent. Can you just kind of describe like why in that div you have like class equals my app, and then you have like a vbind class?
Right, yeah.
Just
so
like, when do you need that colon in front of you? Can you just touch on that a little bit? I think for folks that are new to this.
Sure, yeah. So generally speaking in Vue, if you put a colon in front of something, the value of it is going to be an expression rather than like just a straight up string. So in this case, like the colon, this is going to be an object, right? This colon names is going to be a variable names coming from my script section. Whereas without a colon, it's just a normal HTML attribute, class equals my app. So, class, and then this is just going to be a string. Kind of just expected for this to, not be anything special. Also, like if you didn't know, in Vue, colon thing is shorthand for vbind colon thing. But you can kind of drop that if you want, because it's a lot of typing. But yeah, so that's that's what's happening here. And then so we've got a static class my app, and then we've got a dynamic set of classes that can update. And in this case, I'm using the object notation for that, where key is the class, value is whether or not to show that class.
And maybe one follow-up question, John. Do you know if class is treated as like especially, I guess, and does it merge all of that? And in other cases, wouldn't?
Yeah. Class is a special thing within Vue. If you want to like dig deep into the render function of Vue, that they're actually like handled a little bit differently. But it will be like my app and dark mode will be merged together into just like standard class. Oops. Sorry. Hit that scroll button. All right.
And you can colon styles as well.
Yep. Yeah. So you can you can colon styles if I wanted to like back up to, like I could similarly have container styles be like a computed property or something, and then pass that in here as well if I wanted to do some inline styling. Cool. All right, any other questions on this? Because I think, yeah, that is, yeah, so in this case, I'm a huge, like, I've been fairly diplomatic, and, you know, there's a lot of good stuff about React, like hooks are awesome, but in this case, like Vue hands down wins. It's such a better developer experience. Like anyone who says that they think that style components is better than writing actual CSS is wrong. Like it's not. Like and it's like, this is a first class solution for something that's a primary challenge in web development. Like if you're writing components and not styling components, I don't know what you're doing. So yeah, whereas, you know, Vue has a really good solution to this. React leaves it a little too open-ended and has like, you know, pick your own path, figure out what you want to do, which like could be fine in some instances, but in this case, like this is a primary concern. Similarly, there's other like, talked about core experience of Vue, things like global state management and router, leave it to other libraries. While that's true, Vue at least has an official like global state management library in Vuex. Very similar to Redux. I'm not gonna go too into detail about it, but like they behave very similarly. But like what I find when I Google like how do I do XYZ in Vue, there's usually like one good answer, like the right answer. Whereas in React, it's like there's 5 different answers depending on like what you're using. You know, be it styling, be it state management, or be it routing. I'd say for the most part, React is using React Router, but there's also Reach Router. If you're doing React Native, you're probably using React Native Router Flux, but there's other options out there. With Vue, it's Vue Router, which is great. Like I love that. So like, yeah, sum up, choice is nice, but like honestly, how much choice do we really need? I bring this slide back to emphasize that. Like, there's a lot of fun stuff out there, but like sometimes you just want to build something and you don't have to think about like all the different libraries that you possibly pull in to actually do the thing. And sometimes if like you find the official answer that's going to be supported and people have thought through it and it's going to be community supported, it'll be the right way to go about doing something. So yeah, sometimes you don't need choice. It's better to just like not waste the cognitive overhead effort to sift through options. But another thing is I bring this up to kind of remind us that web development changes like all the time. Even though React might be dominating right now, and even though Vue has the most GitHub stars right now, we shouldn't be content to rest on our laurels. Things will probably change in a couple of years when we'll all be using Svelte. So yeah, get ready for it. All right, and that's my talk. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Open up to any questions, I guess.
This was pretty cool. I mean, I got a better look into Vue. My only kind of concern at the moment is the explanation you gave about the parent-child linking. That was not too intuitive. That it just felt a little cumbersome to, you know. I guess once I mean, React has its own learning curve too, for sure. But that was the only little thing that I found a little.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that like that really is the biggest difference in thinking about things. Like like it's just whether you're coming from one or the other, you're going to be coming from a bias of like, do I pass handler down or do I listen for an event and execute the function? So yeah, that's probably the biggest contrast when it comes to the two in terms of like architecting and thinking through. Otherwise, a lot of it is like a lot of your knowledge is just a matter of like, do I put this in a computed property or in the methods object or, you know, whatever within Vue? It's just a way, Vue is opinionated enough to help you organize your code. Yeah.
That's cool.
By the way, if I may, Varun, two things. First of all, you actually can pass a handler. It's like lesser done, but you actually can.
Okay.
And that was like one of the few slides I was going to chime in a little more and didn't. But I feel like if like literally if I just like could walk you through like what your eye should be following, like once you see it, then it's like, oh, that's what happened there. It's just like there's just a lot. There's a lot in that. There's a lot to look at once. But if I could like literally like use my finger and point, you'd be like, oh, that's what happened there. So it's actually super clear to read, but I'm clearly very biased.
Another quick one. And what about, I mean, I guess this would be more for the React people who saw this, is the concern about being less idiomatic JavaScript than React in terms of like ES6 and just, you know, regular JavaScript that you use more in React as compared to learning all these new data attributes and, you know, that's very custom to Vue.
I mean, yeah, in my opinion, that's like largely a personal preference kind of thing. I mean, there's always a learning curve for anything. I find that the learning curve for Vue is a lot less steep than React. But you know, that it kind of went in my background. I've been doing a lot of like various web development, primarily front end, you know, working in cutting edge ES6 at the time, but you know, that's like, it's common now, but like that looks different to a lot of people who are coming from more traditional HTML templating. And like, maybe not one's better or worse, it's just, that's more personal preference, I think.
Gotcha.
One thing I will say is like, it looks a little irregular because you got these properties and you have these like method, you know, lifecycle methods, but the documentation on the Vue site is pretty darn great. Kind of helps some of that ramp, I think.
It's cool. Thank you.
I'm afraid that, oh, sorry, Jeff.
No, go ahead, dude.
I was just going to say, I'm afraid that John switches out the last few slides for the React meetup.
I had a question, John. So I've seen some Vue packages that I've used for like package components, and for some of them they use like kebab case component names when you render them versus camel case. It just kind of threw me off. Like, what's the convention that is like? Yeah,
that's both work. I prefer using kebab or camel case when it comes to component names because it's, to me, it becomes more obvious when I'm looking at something like, oh, this is clearly a component that I'm importing somewhere else. But yeah, like Vuetify uses V button, V dash button, kebab case. You can still use it camel case if you wanted to. Like it is actually like that's one place where Vue will interpolate and normalize itself.
Is there like a common preference though for that?
I think in the if you like the ESLint recommended package for Vue, I think it suggests use camel case.
Okay.
And that's, yeah, again, that's my personal preference.
It's a lot easier to read. And also lastly, for example, like are there limitations on naming conventions relative to actual HTML elements? So for example, I did a button component and like it had some weird rendering situations where it would just render a regular HTML button, and then other times it would render the component.
Yeah, so yes, Vue's like recommendation is that you any of your components have at least two words. Mm-hmm. So like V button or base button would be a normal thing that you mostly because of that, like the possibility that things will be kind of normalized to lowercase if you just use button, and then HTML will interpret that as a button. You don't want to collide with the actual HTML elements. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, not in React, but it seemed like that happened in Vue.
Yeah, because Vue's like unlike React, Vue's a little easier to like scale down, in that you can just drop it into an existing project and like specifically just have some functionality on a specific component on a page. So that's like it's designed to be able to work with just normal HTML and normal data attribute, or like normal attributes in HTML, and be able to read that if you so choose. You don't have to use Vue components. You could like have server rendered HTML that Vue will then take over. Yeah.
But back to the kebab case versus camel case thing. I mean, I know this may be less relevant to this group, but I think that's actually one of the things I like is I would go with kebab case, just because, especially if any kind of beginner looking at this, you're trying to show anybody who's a beginner, like it's just very clear, like you basically explain it. This is very similar to a div, etc. Right? Like this is what a component looks like. And frankly, like, web components are eventually coming, and it's gonna, that's all gonna be kebab case. So to me, it feels like more natural to like just kind of write them that way. And again, especially like if you're showing it off to beginners, so it's less relevant to us because we don't even see the difference at this point. But I think that's actually an extra draw to me. Is it feels like it's like natural HTML, if you will, as long as you remember to use two words.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Thanks.
Should I unmute everybody and we can kind of, does everybody want to chime in? Kind of any questions, thoughts?
I have a question, but I'd kind of like to know how you would approach it in Vue, because I had this problem in React where I converted a class-based component to a functional component, which just basically, I'm simplifying the problem. It was a table with maybe 100 rows, but a column had drop-downs in it. Changing that to a functional component, since the functional component will render every time there's a state change, that was slowing the performance of that table. And I solved it by memoizing the row for the table. So only if anything in the row changes, or the handle function for the dropdown gets called, then only re-render that row. That was kind of I don't know that that's the right approach. It somehow solved that issue, but I was wondering if Vue handles that better just naturally, or?
Yeah, I mean, like memoization happens a lot more often in Vue, like just with the computed properties. I find myself using that a lot. Whereas with React, I usually don't reach for the use memo hook until I notice something is slowing down, or if I think that something's might potentially, like lots of rows on an array of objects being output or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, so when in Vue, so in my scenario, I had to memorize the element, the actual row, not the state. So I don't know. I guess Vue handles that just naturally.
Yeah, you're gonna be writing a lot less functional components in Vue. You can write functional components in Vue, but that's less the paradigm. So there's a lot. For better or worse, maybe there's performance benefits on both sides. I mean, I tend to find that functional components are functional, have better performance. So if there's a component that I use a lot in Vue, then I'll actually convert that to a functional component. But don't bother talking about it generally, because it's one of those it's more of an optimization once you get to a certain point.
Thank you.
To touch on the memoization versus, in Vue, the computed concept. I mean, at least the way I learned it, I think it suggested that basically you put everything in there that you can. It's like the default behavior is every single method you write in a computed property, unless you need to, then you put it in just a normal method that it's going to fire every single time. But the assumption is that we should just, like, anything you can do, put in there first. And even the watcher that he did, that you can use a watcher, but in general, just like the way you're taught to think is you do everything through a computed property, and only if you need to do you either put in a method and then maybe find some sort of weird reason you might need a watcher, but you rarely use those. Okay. Or at least, I don't know, I shouldn't say rarely, but much less so. There's the workflow is very much focused on.
Yeah, my example probably wasn't great for when I would pull out a watcher. Watchers are more for side effects. Let's say the user changed and I wanted to, I don't know, do an API call to get some new user info or something like that. That'd be a side effect that would have an asynchronous function that does something. Whereas in my example, the watcher is just being used to change is loading state. So if loading state is in fact a property of whether or not names is truthy, then that could be a computed property.
Actually, I had a question on this subject as well. So I learned Vue maybe a month ago, and how I was using computed properties seems different than how you guys are using it. I was under the impression it was more like a property and an object with a setter and a getter. And instead of using when I was using it, it was kind of cumbersome to take in parameters through a computed property. So I was using methods. Is that more common to use methods or computed properties over methods? Because I was using it instead of data.
Yeah, so getter and setter, you don't actually need to use getter and setter in computed property. You can, and there's like times when you would. I generally don't bother because it's less necessary. You can also pass arguments to computed properties, but in that case, they're essentially acting like methods, and that they'll recompute every time, like with every re-render. So like that's you may as well throw it in the methods, in the methods group. Like the difference there would be, whether or not you use parentheses when you're actually invoking the computed property.
Yeah. My question, I guess, was more like, is the computed properties more of a way to abstract a complicated data, like I was using with Vuex, or is it more used for methods, like complicated methods?
I mean, I'd say, like, generally speaking, if there's arguments that I'm passing in, I'd probably just put that in methods.
Otherwise, if you're doing like properties, like data, that data property with with all your state data, you would use a computed property.
Yeah, like if the result of a computed property is something that's like all like internal reactive stuff, like other computed properties, other data, or other props. If you can derive that purely from data props and computed, then I'd probably just keep it in computed.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, whether or not you pass something in is kind of like where I draw the line.
Also, has anyone used like I know there's kind of like how React has React Native. I think I read that Vue has like their own kind of their own library for that. Has anyone used that with any like any opinions?
I would love to get a talk on that somehow.
We did have a talk on that actually. I think, James.
Did we?
It was at Carbon 5, and it was the Russian dudes. Kobe, who were those guys?
Putting me on the spot. Picture the guy's face.
Anyway, yeah, there was two dudes that do it a lot for agency Vue native stuff, right?
Gotcha. They were using Vue native.
So
yeah.
No, they were using Vue native script,
gotcha.
and those are different. That's actually the question, is that there's kind of like five. It's funny because like most of the time in the two ecosystems, there's like 10 React choices, and there's like one Vue choice, and like that's the one thing that's kind of flipped here. That it's very clear that everyone's using React Native and React in the React world. And I think there's like 5 kind of competing choices in the Vue world. So there is Vue native script to me, and again, it's really hard to tell as somebody who hasn't used any of them. To me, feels like the one that's like, slightly ahead of the other ones in terms of how people are using it. But there's also so there's a fork off of React Native called Vue Native. But again, that's not the same as the Vue Native script I was just talking about. And then there's like kind of all the other ecosystem ones that have like a Vue version 2, right? So there's like what is it, like what's the big one in Angular?
Ionic.
Yeah, there's like a Vue version of Ionic. There's and then there's like the ones that like I think like Flutter now is like something that everybody's using. I don't know if that's even considered Vue. Anyway, there's like 5 different options, and I really wish someone would tell me which one to use. It just felt like Vue native script seemed to be the one that was the most like used. I think that like it was like officially kind of dubbed by Evan Yu is like kind of connected to the Vue ecosystem a little more. Anyway, so there's but not, it's Vue native script, not to be confused with Vue native, which is a fork off of React Native.
There's also Onsen, which has been around forever, and I think it's compatible with Vue, Angular, and React. So, but I haven't heard a lot about it.
But I think Unsen is just like a component library
Or a
for the
wrapper.
web.
Yeah, right. It just kind of just hooks it
Like
up.
it looks. No, it's more. It just looks like native, but you're still writing a web app. You're not actually. It's not compiling to a native app.
I know at some point I had a list of 5 of them, and none of them are the ones we've mentioned so far. So like, I just feel like there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
There's also the Chinese one.
Oh yeah, that's one of the ones. It's like that.
Wex
Yeah, and that
or
was that
Wex.
ended up being under the Weeks.
Yeah.
That's one. That was the first one that came to my like that was even before the NativeScript one.
Yeah.
And I think that Weeks is it's spelled WEEX, and I think that actually got put in under the Apache Foundation, like officially like considers it one of its I don't know if it's considered like actually Apache or like they have like a incubator program, but like it's kind of also a little more official under Apache. So it's another another one that you could consider that has some level of support, since Apache kind of considers it one of theirs.
Yeah. They updated their homepage.
Really very deeply ingrained into, I think, the WeChat app or something like that. One of the really big.
Are there any bottlenecks that you guys run into in Vue that you like? I guess it's more common to run into. Like I know for React, it's usually, I think you kind of covered it. It's you run into a lot of performance issues and you have to memorize a lot of stuff. In Vue, like you said, computer properties. But besides that, is there any other things that kind of is very common? Essentially, I'm new to Vue, so I'm still trying to figure out like what are some things to watch out for.
React developers?
No, for Vue. I'm a
No,
React.
I'm saying that's the gap. I'm saying that's the problem. No, I'm kidding.
I think what again, it comes back to like kind of removing choice and having enough being opinionated enough where Vue will kind of steer you to the right way of doing things, whereas it's a little bit easier. Just like jQuery, it was a little bit easier to kind of like hang yourself by writing bad stuff. Not necessarily through any fault of your own, just so much you didn't have any guidance in the best way to go about doing things. I will say that there's like probably the biggest gotchas are in terms of performance is if you start to like put complex things into reactive property, like into your data or props or something. When you put something in data in Vue, it takes what you have and it wraps it in an observable, which like is what tells Vue when something changes and whether it needs to re-render. So different from React in that if you want to update state, you have to explicitly set state, right? Like you're telling React, I want to update state, you're going to have to re-render stuff. Whereas in Vue, it's more like, you don't have to set state. There's magic happening behind the scenes. And if you kind of abuse that by maybe like passing in a really large object into data without being kind of mindful of some of that, then you might run into some performance issues. There's a pretty, I can send out the link on Vue.js Slack group. There's a pretty easy fix for that in cases where you just like, if you wrap whatever your object is in like an object freeze, that tells Vue like this probably isn't going to change, so don't like deeply wrap all of this in an observable. Because that's like if a key in an object changes, Vue's also wrapping like the values in an object in observable. So not only is the object itself in an observable, but all the children are. So, if that can lead to a lot of performance issues if you're not mindful.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Yeah, one of the weird things about Vue as opposed to React is immutability. It kind of tripped me out for a while. Like, what's going on? Like, when I was actually using immutable stuff, I guess I wasn't using it correctly, but it would run into these weird rendering problems. I was like, oh. And then this other developer would just tell me, oh, you don't do immutable stuff. Just change the data. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So that was
that's actually this came up in the Vue Slack channel, or in our Vue Slack channel recently about there's other gotchas in there, and like if there's an object and you just mutate one of the properties of the object, it's not necessarily going to trigger a re-render as well. Sometimes you just need to replace the entire object itself. In which case, like there's that, or like if you can, like in my example, when I was updating the names array with a new array using the spread operator rather than pushing to the existing array. If you push, that is not going to necessarily, that won't trigger a re-render. That's
Yeah, stuff like that was happening. I was like, okay, that's good to know. This is like took me back to my Java days. It's like, whoa.
yeah.
I would. This is not really like a performance-y one, but just like it's a use pattern that Vue kind of really enables you to do, and it's like becomes a real problem, I think, which is the Vue store is so good that I think as you're getting into it, there's this tendency to just like put everything in the store, and it makes it like almost like if you have a really big website, it makes it so hard to find out or figure out where stuff is happening. So I would just like caution against like throwing everything in the store always.
Hey, can you clarify? Do you mean like the Vue top level app component store, or do you mean like
Vuex, the Vuex store?
Vuex store.
Yeah.
Like the equivalent of Redux.
Yeah, I think that's worth differentiating. By the way, one thing I do find that Vue doesn't necessarily like evangelize or like or is too opinionated about, but on a performance front, I do find that it's like you want to like do the usual good practice type things. Like if you're loading your component, use the dynamic import loader just so you're getting that fragment, so you're not like getting more than you need per route. But that's not really a Vue performance problem thing, but that's like a design practice.
Actually, that's one thing I forgot. I didn't make a slide on. It's really, really easy to dynamically lazy load components in Vue. Like that's a first class, like styling. That's a first class consideration. Whereas you need to use like a dynamic loader component in React to dynamically lazy load stuff in as necessary.
That's actually a real performance thing we ran into actually on a really big website we did. Like early on in our Vue experience, we just built like a global sort of plugin to load all components globally, like without having to dynamically import them or anything like that. And it makes a big difference for sure. Big difference, especially on first time to first paint and all those kind of like Google scores.
Yeah, and more so if you're on mobile too, if your customer seeing your site for the first time.
Yeah, that's good. If I do this presentation again or say that, I definitely need to throw in a slide for dynamically lazy loading in components because it's super easy in Vue.
Yeah, pretty darn great.
How do you feel?
Whoever's talking, you're muted yourself. Yep.
Oh no, yeah, I was gonna let him talk because I feel like I was talking too much.
Who is that, by the way? You're the one person who just has iPhone.
Oh, it's Jordy. I had to go to my phone because I had to go to the supermarket.
I thought Evan Yu was like sneakily like asking questions. He's like, no, you guys are wrong. I'm gonna let you keep talking.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about animations. I know, like, how is that kind of? I might have missed the talk because I did have to go to the supermarket for a few minutes.
Yeah.
But did you cover animations in your talk?
I did not. That would have been another couple. Like that's it kind of I hit time limitations here just in prepping this, but yeah, like Vue, the transition component in Vue is
so
freaking
nice.
awesome. And there's not really like there was a React CSS transition group component that used to be part of the core library, but it got pulled off to its own thing. And, I don't know what other options are out there. Again, it's like one of those like Vue considers like transitions as part of good UX, as part of like a first class important part of the core library, which I think is great. So yeah,
Just to,
like, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, just to be fair to React, is there anything, I feel like there's like additional cool stuff like that you didn't talk about in Vue, like the transitions that I know of. But is there other stuff in React that because that's like less my world, it's like really cool that like, I just don't even know exists because like my world is like Vue.
React fragments are nice. I didn't really go into like some of the deeper uses for that, but it's a nice way to kind of like arbitrarily pass stuff around. It's also really nice. It's like really easy in React to just kind of like arbitrarily create a component and pass components around as props and whatnot. I try to avoid using VHTML, which for folks that don't know, that's a directive where you can pass in an HTML string, and Vue will render that as as HTML children for a component. I try to avoid using that if I can, and React is an easy way to do that because you can like arbitrarily create a component and then pass that component across different components. So that's nice. I talked about hooks. Like hooks are freaking awesome. They're so good. I don't know. Otherwise, I mean, there's a reason why I've been in the Vue community for a long time. I'm a much bigger fan of it. So
another thing I'll mention, just I'm thinking about it now for Vue, is we haven't talked at all about slots. That's like a whole conceptual thing that's, you know, it's hard to describe without showing it. But that's like a whole different like way of thinking.
Kind of like children in React, right? Like
yeah, it's like children in React, but like, so children in React would be your default slot in Vue, but in Vue you can also have named slots. So like if I had a layout component, I could have the default slot be my like body, but I can also have a header component that can be overwritten and a footer component that can be overwritten. And this is kind of getting back to that React, like being able to pass components arbitrarily between other components. In React, I would have a header prop that would take a vnode React component and a footer prop, and then like the main children would just be the children component. Whereas in React, I can arbitrarily say this div is in the header slot, this div is in the footer slot, and this div that I didn't specify is going to be in the default slot.
That's cool.
No, yeah, I did like that about Vue. That's one thing too that I've heard that a lot. Like the Vue is very nice for designers, whereas opposed React is, you know, very friendly to developers. You kind of agree with that?
Yeah, but I would say that as a criticism that I would have for React is it just feels like a framework written by a bunch of Facebook engineers rather than like a framework written by web developers, which is what Vue is.
Right.
No, yeah, definitely on my team. It feels a little nicer for the designers to be able to really make some solid contributions aside from just like the mock-ups. Whereas I think if we were to use something like React, definitely they feel more isolated and a little bit more, you know, integration between the developers to make changes.
To that note, I was on Sebastian Chopin, the Nuxt founder. Trying to find it right as we talk, but he tweeted out this guy. A guy is working on kind of like a Sketch or an XD type drag and droppy designery tool that just straight up exports Vue components. I'll try and find it and put it in the chat if I can dig it up. But it looked incredible. Like, that becomes a real thing.
Yeah.
It'd be insane.
Put that in our Slack channel too.
Yeah.
Is the Slack channel on the meetup page? Sorry, it's like my first time here, and I'm kind of.
Yeah. Go to the meetup page, and there should be a join. I think, and there's like I think the paywall's only like a couple $100. So.
Okay, no worries. All in a day's work. That's just good.
You can also hit up
my PayPal email address.
You can also hit up Vue.jsla.com.
Oh, that's right, our new site. Way to go, John. Thank you. That's our new site, and also while we're at it, I don't know who's I'm like looking for the names.
React?
I was gonna do it in Svelte actually, but
who is?
Nice.
No, it's in Nuxt.
While we're at it, we also have a new logo that I was going to announce, but I didn't want to send out 2 emails at once. So I'm going to mention that. But we have a new logo that we all like. Who jumped in on that? I'm trying to look for the name.
That's Romain and. Yeah.
Did he snuck out?
There he is. Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Yeah. Sorry, I like looking at all the
awesome.
little squares. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome.
That looks good.
Yeah, Ellie and John and Romain all did that together. It was awesome. So. Yeah. What else?
Anyway, just hey guys, on the performance thing, because I think I get obsessed on performance, but I just included a link on the chat from a Vue core contributor. His name is Guillaume. He's a pretty incredible developer. Does a lot of stuff in the Vue community, but he's got some. He's done a cool talk on performance, and there's the slides there. It goes from some basic stuff to some pretty advanced concepts, but there are some pretty amazing tips in there. Yeah, it's definitely worth a look.
If you
Thanks
don't
for
mind,
sharing.
I'm gonna cut and paste that and put it in our Slack channel too, so everyone has the ability to go back to it later.
Yeah,
How do I read it? Oh, there's an arrow. Sorry.
he's also, I think, the author of the Vue DevTools, which is a pretty darn amazing suite.
That's another thing you should add on our list, John.
Yeah.
Of like things that are just, I mean, that's night and day.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, but like the Vue DevTools is
huge differentiator in my mind. That's almost alone enough to almost sway one framework versus the other.
Hey, do you guys know if you can do commit statements in the Vuex store using the DevTools or not?
I don't know if you can use the DevTools, but you can essentially create a reference to your app, Vue app. Like, you know, when you're in production, and you can access the Vue app and access the store. And you can run all your commands through the console. I don't know if you can do it interactively. I guess I haven't thought about it. I don't know if it is or it isn't. But that's another way to kind of get at it.
And not to hijack away from Vue specifically, but if anyone, like for me, what really clicked, like we used Vue for a while, and then we started using Nuxt, which in the React world is Next. Actually, I think, James, you presented that once. That's kind of what made me aware of it.
Nice.
And it really changed the game for us because it kind of, like Vue's already got a little bit of an opinion on things, which is good, but Nuxt kind of like goes the next step further and is like, don't even worry about how you set up a store. This is how you do it. And I think it's awesome.
I'm kind of curious what the CLI, like, is there, I mean, the Vue CLI is pretty awesome. Like, is there a React equivalent? Like, again, I'm totally good with that ecosystem.
Yeah, so React also, you can do a create React app is the CLI for that. And that'll do a lot of the similar bootstrapping of like setting up Webpack and all that fun stuff for you without having to worry about it. So that's a good place to start. And then I don't know, Vue CLI has some pretty awesome other stuff built into it though. Like there's that UI that's available with it if you want.
React doesn't have the GUI, right? Or does it? I've never seen it.
Yeah, I don't think it does.
It does.
It's amazing.
There's a GUI.
There's a GUI?
For Vue side. Yeah.
For which one? There is for both?
I'm sorry, I'm talking about Vue. Yeah, there is a.
The Vue has a GUI, and then another thing. And again, please correct me if anybody knows more about the React ecosystem because I don't. But another thing within the Vue CLI and the GUI and all that is that like there's just the ability to like really like there's almost like a plugin system where like what if you've set up your app using that Vue CLI, you can go back into it within a GUI anytime you want and just like add like an infinite number of components. I mean, it's just like totally takes all the coding effort out of that, right? It's just like, I mean, it's like adding like a Firefox extension or plugin, right? I mean, it's just like, you just click on it and like, oh, I've got this new, you know, whatever it is I need, whether it's a new external library or anything else. Like, it's just like, you can just like sort through all the different Vue stuff. So that's pretty dope.
Yeah.
It's built like more as a framework than just like this boilerplate code that it generates.
Yeah, if you've used React Native at all, Expo is fairly similar to what Kobe's describing. It does a lot of like hooking up whatever plugin library that you want to use for you, since there's a little bit more logic involved with that when it comes to building out native stuff.
I have to jump off. I just want to say thanks to everybody. I'm glad I finally made the time to join. But I do have a question, Kobe. I think you know, it sounds like everyone's employed, which is amazing. I'm wondering, is there something that we do as a team to kind of gauge the employment situation and help each other out if and when others, you know, find themselves on shaky footing? Is there an effort to kind of talk about that and help others as things change?
I tend to, at these meetups, say, does anybody have any jobs that they're looking for / anybody hiring? I have yet to say that because it felt like everybody kind of knows each other already. But there's not like a concerted effort. And, you know, now that we, as of a whole, I don't know, 20 days now, have a Vue.js LA site, maybe we could have maybe that's something we could add to there. But there is nothing specific that I can think of. Is there something? Did you have something in mind?
Yeah, I just want to know that if that was okay to even express that, and if
Please
stay open or open up, I'd love for us to be able to discuss that and help each other out. My company is pretty stable, so I'm just kind of joining here in the network and so just kind of have that discussion. I think that's a nice way to kind of keep our community together as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. And I mean, while we're at it, before you hang up, like, is anybody looking to hire right now? Is anybody, looking anything that?
We might be. The company's esalon.com. Is there any place that I can get people's info, or where do you guys normally post your, when you're looking for a position or something? Or you can just send me in chat your email and we can connect.
What some of the other meetups that I've been to do in their Slack channels, they have like a particular section.
Yeah, there's a jobs channel on the Slack.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole 20 days old maybe. So the Slack channel's been around for a while, but we decided to finally add a channel. So yeah, definitely jump in there, jump into Slack, and then add your job stuff, whether you need it, whether you want it. Just yeah, please do. And that honestly, like, I just for the record, guys, like we didn't even have like a random invite link until like a couple of months ago. I think Slack didn't used to have them until like 6 months ago or something like that. So ever since I've added that, like the scale of people who've like suddenly been joining is like pretty sweet. So like the group is really growing in there. So please jump in.
To the jobs thing, I would say Funkhouse, we're looking for a mid to senior Nux developer. That would be Vue.js. So if you think that sounds interesting to build pretty high design websites with a pretty high degree of CSS needs, I think we want to talk to you.
Hey, Kobe, do we have a GitHub organization repo that's available for us to contribute towards in regards to the website, or like where is the current website?
Yeah, do you guys have any open source projects in Vue that you guys are working with the community or anything? That'd be kind of interesting.
John,
well, the website's on my account. Feel free to make a pull request. I guess we.
Yeah, I can start a group.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'd be down. I like working on stuff. I don't have all the time in the world because I have like 2 jobs, but still spending some time, I think would be pretty cool. Mentoring people that are either newer or even going with people that are more experienced too. Some open source things would be interesting to me at least. Not sure if anyone else. Animation is kind of my thing right now. So that'd be pretty cool to do anything in animation space.
We can animate the 3 pages on the Vue.js LA site.
Let's go.
Page.
No, that's a good idea, James. Well, we'll add a group.
One thing I would love to see is like people's like VS Code and just like dev environments set up like configuration files, because I just switched over to VS Code from WebStorm and like I have a lot of questions. I would love to see examples.
Oh yeah, definitely. If there's any productivity tools that you guys use on VS Code, I mean that VS or the Vue snippets are pretty helpful to me. I mean, especially when you're setting up a new component, just do like what was it, V template or something, and then just does the whole thing for you. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. VTour, if you don't have it yet, is the shit.
VTour, check that out.
VETUR, it's the thing to have.
VTour.
I'm using Atom, I guess. It's weirder.
I'm still on Sublime.
Sorry, VTour is it's an extension for VS Code. If you're using VS Code, definitely download VTour.
I'll check that out.
And while we're at it, I'm trying to look it up right now. I'm trying to remember what it is, but the Eclipse Foundation, which I know sounds super old-ish, they recently have like gotten to like a first 1.0 of like essentially like a VS Code competitor. So I've been meaning to clone it, but there it's called THEIA. So Thea. which they're kind of like positioning as more open source than the one that's from Microsoft, and more of a, I don't know what this means. You guys read up about it if you want, but it's a, they're saying it's instead of just an IDE, it's like an IDE platform. And I don't know what that means, but anyway. It's
that means they think they have a business model, Kobe. That's what that means.
Yeah, well, yeah, just like the Eclipse Foundation in general. I'm sure in the next 20 years they'll figure it out. Hey, they do put out some good stuff. So anyway, I do want to check that one out actually.
What's it called?
It's called THEIA, Thea.
THEIA.
Yeah. So I think they just hit a 1.0. To be perfectly frank with you, I tried to get it on my machine and couldn't figure out how. So I think it's like meant to be like on a server. Like it's like meant to be like in the same way that, I don't know if you guys know this, but VS Code, they're not calling it that, but they basically just integrated it into GitHub. So now you can click on any of your code and like have it in an IDE. They just like launched that a few days ago. So literally like every GitHub repo now is gonna have an extra button there that can basically like, you know, open up essentially a VS Code IDE for that code in GitHub. So I think that they're kind of trying to do that, but it's almost like they didn't build the desktop version yet, and so you have to build it within. I was like part of the way through a tutorial in what's the framework where you can do JavaScript or like create a desktop app with it. Electron. So you can kind of create an Electron app out of it. Only I got like part of the way through the tutorial. I was like, this is too much. Like when they have the PPA, I'll get there.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, but I actually want to check that one out because it sounds cool.
You know, actually, in regards to Nuxt, has anyone like solved the aliasing code following issue? Because like the aliases to the source directory, you know, we use like the @ and it's great, but now I can't like, you know, command click or control click and get to the component easily. Anyone face this problem? No?
No, I haven't used Nuxt at all yet.
I see.
Yeah, I did not solve that problem when I was at joy mode, but
there's like this long GitHub thread of like exporting out the Webpack config so you can set this, but like I don't think it's like any progress yet on it. But it's just been some like this one annoying thing about Nuxt that
I mean, if you get access to the Webpack config, then you can just set aliases, right? I mean, I don't know how that works with Nuxt.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't export out. Like Webpack config is pretty much like hidden from you. So
yeah, so that was going to be my question with Vue. The bundler is Webpack, right? Or with the Vue CLI, or is it
with the Vue CLI?
And as opposed to React, the Create React app, which doesn't allow you to modify it unless you eject it. Is that the same situation with Vue?
I think so. I don't know if
there
we
is
have an eject.
I can't remember. Yeah, I think Vue CLI has there's a Vue config file that you can use to make modifications on your Webpack. Similar with Nuxt, there's a Nuxt config file where you can kind of add some settings there, but you're not directly manipulating your Webpack settings.
Okay, cool. And I know Nuxt is a framework, but I mean, when picking, now if I want to switch and try out Vue, should I be going to Nuxt first or Vue first? What's the opinion there?
I would read the Vue docs and get an understanding of what like the core Vue is, but if you're gonna like actually start working on a project, I recommend starting in Nuxt instead of trying to understand how to figure out your directory structures and how to hook up the router and like store and things like that. It's just much more straightforward.
Cool.
Yeah, I actually learned Nuxt first, I guess. That like I was introed to Nuxt and then kind of learned Vue. And there was a little bit of like having to figure out, so Nuxt has it's a superset of like they add some additional functionality that isn't available within vanilla Vue. So that's probably the one thing that'll trip you up. Like you can't do some certain things, but and also like an important consideration is that Nuxt is a universal rendering framework. So like it'll work it's designed to work both in Node and in the client. So there's some additional stuff to consider, much like Next versus React.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We've got GridSim, and what do they have?
Gatsby.
There we go.
Yeah, the server-side rendering thing of Nuxt is definitely hard for like a traditional front-end person to kind of get their head around. Like, this is coming off the server, and if you try and change it, you're going to get these weird node mismatch errors that are like very confusing. So if you've got funny enough, I think I had a big advantage because I came a little bit out of PHP. So like I understood server-side rendering or like what was happening there. So if you've come out of like a servery background, it would probably make more sense to you.
Can someone do a GridSim like talk? I hear about this like almost every single time we meet, but like
James,
it's hard for me to comprehend.
We had one.
Do we? Fuck.
Look, it's on the Vue.js LA YouTube channel. Ashok gave a good talk.
We have a YouTube channel?
Look at that. You see,
on the website.
Is it on the website?
Well, now the website has links to all these things, but yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Oh,
you should check that
okay.
out. So
I've been going to the wrong Vue.js LA. Okay.
I can't tell if that's a joke or not. The time of beating Vue.js LAs.
No, remember Kobe? I bought
that
the .la
one
long time ago, and my browser is just set to go there.
Yeah, no. We instead of calling you and asking you to change the DNS, we did. John just bought a new URL. This is like a month ago. What was the last thing you were saying? Oh, so check that out. So Ashok actually didn't just give that talk, but if you stick to it, he ends up giving you a bonus talk on like a bunch of.
Which one is it? What is it called?
I'll look later. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that'll be nice.
I was wondering if any of you have seen what Evan Yu has been doing in the last months on his Twitter account regarding something called Vite. Have you seen that on his Twitter?
Called what?
It's called Vite, like VITE, and it's like a no bundler view something.
Oh, Vue, it's Vue Lite. Yeah.
Vue Lite.
Make web dev fast again.
It's it's Vite, or I mean it's a French word. VITE. Yeah.
Interesting.
Does someone want to share their screen?
What's it for?
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so when you're like working in development within Vue, they're like there's the compilation step where it actually has to take your Vue single file component and turn it into JavaScript that's understandable by the browser. I think if I'm understanding what Vite is correctly, it's like it kind of is able to do that more on the fly and within the browser. So it's able to use like actual ES modules to load, like to do a lot more compiling while you're doing development.
You want to share your screen if you're looking at it?
No. This is just me remembering off when I looked at this last. Yeah, so I think it's just like it's much faster web development without having to, like, when you hit save, having to wait for, like half a second for things to actually update.
Oh, nice. So like this is like basically a dev environment without like a bundler, right? Like without Webpack really, or bypassing as most of that as possible. Oh, nice.
This is the world we live in, where like the Webpack, the delay while you hit save from Webpack to auto reloading in your browser is like too much.
Yeah.
And we need an improvement. I love it. I'm a big fan.
I mean, as the projects get larger, right? Like you definitely do run into situations where that's like the biggest performance bottleneck is your dev experience, not like somewhere else. Like So anything to improve that, like that'd be great.
I feel like we collectively have to like push to like get Evan you some sort of like big awards. Like he's just like man, like you blink and he creates a whole new project that would like it's crazy. He's so amazing, so prolific too.
Actually, so yeah, I saw his tweet like before he went to sleep, and then in the morning he was like, "Oh, I'm done with that." It's actually nice. I created overnight. Like it's crazy.
Wow.
There's an interesting thing that I've used for the Nuxt. So Nuxt has this thing where you can hire the core team as like freelancers. And it's something that I did a couple of months ago. We were just stuck on like, I can't remember what it was. I was stuck on trying to understand how to like do some weird render component thing. And I hit them up via there. They have like a official sort of like tech support thing where you just pay them. I think it's like $200 an hour or something. And it's through this website called OTechie. You kind of get like a Slack, but it's not Slack in the browser. And you can just talk to whoever on the core team wants to kind of jump on it. And then they just sort of bill you hourly for it. And it was great. It worked out really well, which I think is pretty unique. I haven't seen that before, where you can kind of just hire like a bunch of the core team dudes hourly to help you on stuff, which was really good for us as an agency, like leaning into Nuxt. There's like a new thing that I was like the expert on it. And when I don't know it, I email John. And so it was good to have like a fallback plan there. So yeah, it's cool.
That's really cool. I mean, for everybody except for John, it just lost his $200 an hour. But
yeah, see if I can get on that list there. See if they can throw some work my way.
John's doing it for $190 now.
Hey guys, I posted a link to a section inside the Vite project that we were just talking about. And I don't know if, like, is it because of Vite or is Vue 3 now supporting functional components in JSX now, like how I guess React does it? I haven't seen this type of statement in Vue before, and it's been something I've been waiting for to write JSX.
You're currently able to write JSX in Vue if you so choose. You just need to
Right, but it's just like this is omitting the render function. It's like very React-ish. Before, at least like the JSX I know of in Vue, you have to create a render function.
Yeah, this is new to me, but it does look very Reacty.
Well, that's cool if it can start doing this.
Is there any way in Vue to make like very simple? Well, I guess not, huh? Because in React, you know how you can just make some like a function that just pretty much returns JSX.
Right. So that's what we were just talking about. There is a way, but it's just not as
simple.
It's not as clean as
you.
React. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we're looking at an example right now where it's kind of showing that it may be feasible in the next version.
Oh, what?
I'm not sure.
Cover, you muted.
Thank you. As I was saying to myself, it's close to 8:30. We've gone over, which is fantastic, but I feel like we should start wrapping it up because it's almost time for the next one.
Next one?
next month.
Oh, I got it.
Anyway, this was amazing. Everyone, I'm gonna unmute everybody so we can all clap collaboratively. Hold on. Participants, unmute all. Can everybody talk here? There we go. There we go, John.
Good job, John.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really helpful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure meeting everyone. Everyone has a good night, hopefully.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
It was a pleasure, everybody. This was really, honestly, John, this was super cool. I think everybody learned a lot, and maybe we get a couple more converts. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm converting now. Thanks, John.
Me too.
I'm gonna do it, Kobe.
All right. Go for it. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I said I'm gonna convert.
Oh, there you go. Oh, that was Brett. I didn't see the which square lit up. Nice.
Thanks, John. That was really
All
great.
right, that's one.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening.
All right, everyone. You have a great night. I'm gonna end the convo, and we'll catch each all soon. And be in for Drew's talk next month, which is really cool.
Cool.
Woo. All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.